be on your guard. There are older and fouler things than orcs in the deep places of the world.
New Zealand, land of unparalleled beauty, elegance and grandeur. When tasked with the monumental undertaking of creating the Lord of the Rings trilogy, native Kiwi Peter Jackson mined this visual masterpiece for all it was worth. I'd been there as a child, but hadn't really experienced it to its full extent. So when a mate rang me up and suggested we take a tour of some of these spectacular locations, I jumped at the chance. Then,
a gunman with an automatic weapon has opened fire on a mosque in central Christchurch. We are on standby for a statement from the Prime Minister at 4 o'clock. There are unconfirmed reports as many as 27 people are dead.
New Zealand became front and centre on the global map, and its beauty became secondary to its politics.
Of saying what I've been saying by coming round to my home with a show of force to scare me into shutting up. I mean, this is what the Stasi did in East Germany. This is what communists do. This is what fascists do.
It became clear that it wasn't just the hobbits in the Shire that had issues. It was the Kiwis themselves. Ironically, we'd booked our initial flights into Christchurch, where the shooting had happened. What we found was a low-key town, still rebuilding from a powerful earthquake that devastated the city of nearly 400,000 in 2011. We paid homage to the poor souls who'd lost their lives in the tragedy in the modest mosque and nearby Islamic centre, located in a quiet area adjacent to the city's downtown. The mindlessness of the whole event left us shaking our heads in wonder as we proceeded on our journey. Our pace was ambitious, to see much of the country in 9 days. Our first foray was to head south, into the majesty of New Zealand's Alps.
This, of course, is the Kingdom of Rohan, and that is where Adoris stood. It no longer stands there, they took it down, and in fact they never used it to shoot in. They shot those interiors in Wellington, but the exteriors were shot here, and it looked magnificent at the time, and still does. But what isn't a special effect is this extraordinary structure which has charisma. You wouldn't think a rock would. You wouldn't think a bunch of mountains would. But the Lord of the Rings is real, and we are in it.
Leaving this breathtaking place made us wonder who may or may not be the kings, dwarves or elves of the current political movements in NZ. A lengthy drive and 3-hour ferry ride found us in Wellington, New Zealand's capital. Unlike Christchurch, Wellington was well tended, vibrant and alive, and a treasure trove for Lord of the Rings junkies, the foremost being the Weta Workshop, where the trilogy's numerous effects were created. Then before heading out of town, we stopped by the impressive structures that house New Zealand's Parliament, most notably the Beehive, where government business is conducted. There, a lone protester, in the 55th day of a vigil against the government's climate change policies, caught our attention.
I'm really here for this. That's a much longer conversation.
Long on will, but short on words. However, his lone supporter was not.
Oil, gas and coal use and extraction have to stop completely. Agricultural methods which aren't regenerative have to stop completely. Use of petrol cars has to stop and diesel cars has to stop. And that's going to change things completely. But we've got a choice. Either we change things completely or we die.
With that cheerful thought to ponder, we changed the subject to the events at Christchurch. Did you like the way that your Prime Minister handled the aftermath?
I think that she handled it in the best way possible. I think that was really humble and caring. I went to a week later, I went to a ceremony outside the mosque in Taupo and I wore a hijab as did many of the people there, because we were trying to show a solidarity with them.
The fallout, however, has been perhaps a different story. Unannounced visits by local police on the citizenry became commonplace.
He said something about that online, this chap, and he had, because he's a hunter, he has pictures of himself and his wife with his gun and his what he's hunted, you know. And he had the police knocking on his door about a week ago, saying that because he was doing political stuff, they wanted to look at his Facebook posts and things, and they were keeping an eye on him. And he said, what posts are they? Just tell me what they are, and sure, I'll show them. They didn't know, but they basically told him he was in trouble, and they came right into his house to tell him he was in trouble because he was saying political stuff and that he was a right-wing, and it's saying right-wing stuff, which actually he didn't consider himself right-wing, he considered himself left-wing, if anything. And he said that, you know, he didn't actually consider himself right-wing, but now that he's had the police do that, he's maybe thinking maybe he should get a bit more kind of combative, kind of in not in those words, but that he was so annoyed about it that he, you know, we've got a supposedly a little bit left from government, but their police come around someone's house saying, oh, you're writing political stuff on Facebook, we don't like that, blah, blah, blah. Maybe I'm not as left-wing as I thought I was, you know.
We bid farewell to our activist friends, who before departing offered up some wonderful tips on where else to visit during our Kiwi travels, for which we were grateful, but also thought how difficult it would be for her to engage in such activity if she actually observed the zero travel tolerance they just so vividly articulated. Our next stop would be the Putungarua Pinnacles, the majestic rock formations outside of Wellington that served as the Pillars of the Kings. A rather challenging and sloppy hike consumed our afternoon, but the payoff was well worth it. On the road to our next adventure, our little protester conversation stuck with us and shed new light on the dichotomy of today's New Zealand. We wanted to find out more. A bit of research turned up a few candidates who've been in the trenches, so to speak, as far as the free speech debate, many of whom had posted eye-opening entries on social media. But when approached, the channels of some had disappeared, while others were reluctant to speak publicly on the issue. One who wasn't, however, was a relative newcomer to the free speech movement in New Zealand and has risen quickly in its ranks. Known simply as Rahera on her YouTube channel, this native Kiwi brought a unique perspective to the mix. Rahera graciously agreed to speak with us on camera, so we took a detour and headed up to Hastings, a cool little town on New Zealand's east coast.
I think that anybody should be able to express their sincerely held beliefs in a non-violent way. As long as you are not threatening or inciting violence, you should essentially be able to say whatever you want. And that doesn't mean that other people can't disagree with you or object or protest and debate, but you should have the freedom to say it, because I think it's just a dangerous territory once you start silencing one group of people's opinions. Where does it end? And who gets to choose? I don't think I've ever expressed an opinion that could realistically be considered right-wing or like even conservative, really. Like I am a liberal, like I'm an old school liberal, but then because I say I believe that anyone has the right to express their views, even if I don't if I disagree with them, that's still okay. You can still say what you think and we can talk about it. Just saying that, it's like that must mean I'm right-wing. I must be conservative. I must be racist if I'm saying that even just mainstream conservative right-wing people should be allowed to have those opinions. That must mean I'm part of it. And it's like they can't comprehend the idea that you can defend freedom of speech without actually supporting the views of people you're defending. You know, I've seen people be suspended from, say, Twitter for posting the most innocuous things. The perpetually offended people who seek out things to be outraged by, it's more cracking down on what people can think and say and even joke about. And that's one of the things where I just think once you start putting rules around comedy and humour, that's dangerous. Like, that's a dangerous path. But you've got people in the UK that are being prosecuted for making jokes. Or like Stephen Crowder, the Louder with Crowder conservative comedian. He's been completely demonetised by YouTube. He can no longer make a living doing that now, just because of really just mob, the thugs veto. They're just bombarding them, and it's going to happen. It's going to get worse.
Rahera was drawn into the free speech debate by what many would call a rather mainstream attitude.
I'm not a big fan of feminism, so like modern third wave feminism. It started because I saw so much demonization of males and men, and just all this men are scum, men are trash, just terrible. And this is not acceptable. You can't talk about people. That's why I talk about dehumanizing language and the way people talk about men, all men, particularly white men, which again, it's sort of, so we think racism is bad, but it's okay to talk about straight white males like the scum of the earth and the root of all evil. I'm like, this isn't okay. Like, we've all got fathers and brothers and uncles, and I've got 4 nephews, and I don't want them growing up in a world where they're hated for being male. So I started my YouTube channel basically because I wanted to speak up about that, and in whatever inarticulate way I did, I just said, look, I don't hate men. I don't think you're all predators. I don't think you're all out to oppress us. I don't feel oppressed as a woman, and I see the narrative out there is that women are oppressed and marginalised and we're victims, and I don't feel that way. But that's what got me interested in free speech, because when I said that, look, I don't feel oppressed, I got shouted down. Yes, you are oppressed. We all are, we're oppressed. And how dare you suggest that you're not oppressed? But I don't feel oppressed, I never have. So, but just questioning the narrative, that's when I found I'm being shouted down, and then I thought, actually, people need to be able to say how they feel without this sort of mob, this group of clamping down on the wrong opinions. Because what if I'm right?
Historically, great minds had warned about a future where this inalienable right would be compromised.
1984, everything's Orwellian thing. It used to be a little bit of a cliche, but now I feel like it's so appropriate. With like Antifa, the anti-fascists. That's the ministry of truth. That's the ministry of love right there. They are the total opposite of what they claim to be. And anyone, I think, with any brains can see that when they see what they're doing. They can see who's the bad guy in a situation where an unarmed individual man is being mobbed by a group of angry thugs. Anyone with any reason can look at that and tell who's the bad guys, but because they call themselves anti-fascist, all naive people out there are going to think, well, if they call themselves anti-fascist, then why would they beat up anyone who wasn't a fascist? Just going around violently suppressing opinions you disagree with in the name of anti-fascism. Like, you couldn't make it up.
Like most Kiwis, the Christchurch killings also affected Rahera immensely.
Since Christchurch, there's been this big focus on white supremacy in New Zealand. There's dark forces at work, they're out there, they're here, they're among us. And in reality, I don't see that. But of course, I'm not going to go like mix in circles where I'm going to see them. But I think because of freedom of speech, those kind of views are very much the fringe, and because of the open discourse, we know that those views are wrong, and I think they're kind of been squished into about, I don't know how many there'd be, like, are there a couple of hundred, like, losers on the fringe that are just sad people?
But she also sensed a convenient knee-jerk reaction by government, followed by a frightening overreach.
Police knocking on the doors, police taking them to prison, putting them in a cell. A mother, a lactating mother with children was arrested, taken to prison, put in a cell like for hours before she was released. But the fact that this is happening, she just said something. You shouldn't be able to put people in jail for saying things.
And New Zealand, of course, and you posted one of these videos.
There's a video of a guy, it's Sunday morning, he's just at his home, 2 armed police officers came to the door and they refused to talk to him, to tell him what it was about, the visit. He said, come in, but I'm going to be filming you. And they refused to talk to him on camera. They didn't say what they were there for, what charge, under what law they wanted to talk to him, and they wouldn't talk to him unless he put the camera away. And I don't know what this guy had done or said or whatever it was, but I think surely if the police are going to come to a house unannounced with firearms to talk to you, there should be transparency, and you should know what you're there to be talked about, and had you committed a crime. As far as I'm aware, he had done nothing but post anti-government sentiments on his Facebook page. So
the police are monitoring people's social media statements.
Apparently this is really widespread. This is happening, so I'm hearing people calling in talkback radio saying the police have come to my door. They've asked me, did you call the Prime Minister a socialist? Well, she's a socialist. We all know she is a socialist. But did you call her that? It's getting creepy and weird, but it's not being reported. And I don't know.
After wrapping our interview, we joined Rahera for a stroll by a nearby stream with her very cool dog Loki. Then she delivered this bombshell.
I was at Common Room Bar just the other night, and I got chatting to a young Labour guy who's very involved in the Labour Party, and we were chatting about politics, as you do, and it got to the topic of freedom of speech. And I said, I'm really passionate about freedom of speech, actually. And from the point that I said that, I could see his demeanour towards me changing. He started looking a little bit nervous, a little bit uncomfortable, started looking away, eye contact started dropping less, and I'm thinking, is he now thinking that I'm some kind of alt-right Nazi, because I've said I believe in free speech? And what world are we living in that someone says, I'm for freedom of speech, which is a liberal position, to I've got to be wary of this person because she defends freedom of expression? It's very topsy-turvy, and it does make you feel a little bit just wary of being open about stuff, because you don't want people to think things are of you that aren't true, that are the worst things anybody could really be. I think being a racist is one of the most ill-informed, just completely objectively wrong things that a person can be. But it's been hinted at me that I am one. Someone called me a closeted white nationalist, and I was like, dude, what the fuck? What are you, closeted white nationalist? Who the hell do you think you are? And he said, okay, not closeted then. I'm not even going to waste my time with you. If you're going to straight away jump to that, those kind of absurd accusations, just because I'm saying people that I disagree with have a right to speak.
Ironically, that evening we joined Rahera and some others at a local Hastings pub, and the very same gentleman was there. She engaged him again, explaining that we were interviewing her about free speech and perhaps he might want to talk on camera. Once again, he slinked away as if we had the plague, making one wonder just what is so suddenly frightening about free speech. So we caught up with Rob Andrews, a third-generation gentleman dairy farmer in Clive, for another perspective. He's seen his beloved land change dramatically of late.
Probably the big changes that I've seen would be the ability to find actual news stories within any type of platform that you are convincingly sure are actually true, because there's so much promoted propaganda within the country at the moment. It's hard to weed out what is actually truth, what is actually people's perspectives, what people feel. And after the shootings in Christchurch, there was a major clampdown on the new gun laws brought in. We had licensed gun holders that have been legal non-criminals for a long time who become criminals overnight. There are people out there who it's affected their livelihoods, and there hasn't been any actual discussion. It's just literally been a stomp down. This is what's happening, this is change, and you guys are going to deal with it. So it seems very undemocratic from the democratic New Zealand that we knew when I was a child. It seemed more like a foot on top of your throat rather than a let's sort this out, this can't be right.
After getting to know Rob's fantastic family and being treated to an incredible lunch of New Zealand venison, we proceeded on our way to the next venue. The weather, which had been quite pleasant to this point, went south, even though we were heading north to Mount Doom. The mountain lived up to its name, and the foreboding tone of the day felt ultimately appropriate as we made our way to the Mecca, where, of course, the sun always shines. We're there. Hobbiton in the Shire. For real. With perfect and detailed as you like. And a perfect microcosm for New Zealand today. The entire set of what would be the Shire in the 3 Lord of the Rings films, as well as in the Hobbit prequels, lies still intact, with every minute Middle-earth detail there to see, touch and experience. The Hobbiton tour is not only vivid and impressive, but very big business. Full buses run all day, every 5 minutes at 84 New Zealand dollars, feeding an empire resembling Disneyland. It's a crowning jewel of New Zealand tourism and serves as an intriguing metaphor for New Zealand today. But what is New Zealand today? Is there a real assault on free speech? And if so, what is driving it?
There's definitely been an influence as she's came in, influx of Chinese investment within New Zealand. And I think it goes through even within our Pacific Islands that New Zealand governs. In Niue, there has been massive investments over in Niue to redo the road through Chinese officials. And what would China be doing in Niue? But it seems to be it's a New Zealand governed island that has the potential for mineral wealth, or something a little bit more sinister. Our Prime Minister's father is the Governor General there.
We have the Human Rights Act, there's Section 61, which means it's about inciting racial disharmony, which I've always thought was like, I'm okay with that wording, but then it's like, who gets to decide what inciting racial disharmony is? And people have tried to use it for various things. They're talking about strengthening that and bringing more laws in. And that's where I go, nah, we don't need more. If anything, we need better free speech laws. We don't need more restrictions.
The media's an interesting culprit here. Unlike the 24/7 news-feeding frenzy in the States, news stations seem hard to come by. While travelling from South to North Island, we were hard-pressed to find much substantive news on television or in the local papers, suggesting a unique detachment between the people of New Zealand and their politics.
New Zealanders as a whole seem to be very reserved to actually speak out and get active. And if you're seen to be someone doing that, a lot of people actually shun you straight away. I mean, at the end of the day, we live in a beautiful country. Most people are too busy at the beach or enjoying themselves and actually getting too involved with the politics. There's a saying out there that just vote Muppet because you're probably going to get one.
If we were to look at the general population as being the naive sort of hobbits, I think someone's telling them all that there's this threat coming. And obviously since Christchurch, it's
by shutting down any forms of communication from any point of view is only going to create hostility and segment people into groups rather than having a group conversation and coming up with solutions.
It can get quite demoralising, and sometimes I feel like I'm kind of just one person against a great big tide of madness and I'm trying to stand my ground, but I'm not alone. There are people out there and they're intelligent people, they're centrists, they're moderates, they're classical liberals, they're conservatives, just people not to one side of either extreme. And I would love it if more people like that could come together and just say, let's not get into this tribalism thing. Let's just take every issue as it comes and not be on this, you've got to be on this side or you're this.
Everyone should have the rights. Free speech is a basic human right. I think that's really important. I think places in the world where there's no free speech, they're scary places. Yeah.
High five. In today's brave new world, freedom of expression and suppression of it has become an issue throughout the globe. As a second lieutenant in the First World War, J.R.R. Tolkien witnessed the most heinous horrors imaginable, and as a personal catharsis, created an epic allegory within an alternate universe to make sense of those experiences. The constant struggle of good and evil, naivety and nobility, power and the abuse thereof. All themes that still resonate today as profoundly as ever. The most tyrannical dictators throughout history all had one thing in common. They universally oppressed free speech. The New Zealand Bill of Rights is very plain about it, yet presently this inalienable right seems under unique assault. One thing is for certain, much like with the hobbits in the Shire, there is reason for concern among the Kiwis of New Zealand. Peter Jackson's award-winning cinematic epic of the literary classic took 3 lengthy parts to tell. For the people of New Zealand, the tale has just begun.
Even the smallest